My name is Isaac Reichman. I am the Director of Public Information at the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. Thank you for joining today's webinar on the Paycheck Protection Program and other emergency funding opportunities. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Again, my name is Isaac Reichman. I'm with the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. We've been holding webinars throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's webinar is specifically on the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. We'll also touch on a couple other emergency funding opportunities. BACP does not oversee these programs, so we're happy to be joined today by Carol Harris from the Small Business Administration and Brad McConnell from Accion Chicago. So they'll be doing the majority of today's presentation. Before we get started, I know a lot of folks are here want to get their questions answered, and we're going to do our best to answer as many questions as we possibly can today. Please use the chat box, the chat function on webinar in order to submit those questions. You'll notice there's both a chat and a Q&A. Please use the one labeled chat. That's the best place for your questions. Note, however, we already have about 250 attendees and the numbers are going up, so we may not be able to answer every question. Some very specific questions we'll have to refer you to your lender, but we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. You'll also notice on the bottom of this page, BACP outreach at cityofchicago.org. Any questions that aren't answered or anything that's we're unable to answer, please submit those questions via email to bacapoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Also, this webinar will be recorded, so if you're unable to, if you miss something or if you have any colleagues that are unable to attend, we will be recording it and posting it on our YouTube page and also on our main webinar page as well. So the agenda for today's webinar, first, we're going to give the welcome, which I'm in the middle of right now. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Tier 2 mitigation measures. As many of you know, Chicago moved into Tier 2 mitigation measures today. I'm going to provide a brief overview of that while I have everybody here. I think it's a good opportunity to remind people about that. Then we're going to pass it over to Carol Harris from the SBA, the Small Business Administration. She's going to provide an overview of the PPP and also touch on a couple other funding programs that are provided by the SBA. And then Carol's going to pass it over to Brad McConnell from Accion Chicago, who's going to talk about using PPP to replace revenues and a little bit more detail on how to apply. And finally, we're going to have some time for questions at the end. We're going to make sure we save a lot of time for questions. I see a lot are coming in. We will be answering those as we wrap up at the end of the webinar. So real quick, before we get into what we're here for, the Paycheck Protection Program, I wanted to take this opportunity while we have a number of business owners here to provide a very quick overview of the new announcement that came into effect as of yesterday, that Chicago and Cook County and a number of other regions are now in Tier 2 mitigations. That means we've made enough progress in the fight against COVID-19 to start loosening some restrictions. These restrictions are set by the state, not by the city, but we have now moved into Tier 2 capacity, into Tier 2 mitigations, which you can see on the right-hand side of this page. That means for a lot of places that were at 25% capacity are now at 40% capacity. Indoor recreation can now reopen. Places like bowling alleys, arcades, museums can now reopen also at 25%. Personal services can move from 25% to 40%. They also can do services that require removal of face coverings, such as facials, beard shapes, things like that. Retail stores can move from 25% to 40%. Event venues, performance venues, and movie theaters. In Tier 3, they had to be closed indoors. Now that we're in Tier 2, they can open indoors. Performance venues, movie theaters at 40% or 50 per space, and private events capped at 10 people, weddings, things like that. Additionally, bars and restaurants, there's no change for indoor capacity at this point for bars and restaurants. They still must be closed indoors. However, if a bar or restaurant has a private event space, that is specifically just for private events. They can operate at a capacity of 10, provided they have food. Childcare and out-of-school programs have no change. Health and fitness centers can now open for indoor group classes up to 10 people, again at 25% capacity. I want to provide a really brief overview of this before we get into the details of the TPP. We'll also be doing a full hour-long webinar on these changes this Thursday at 2 p.m. So check out our website, same place you went to register for this webinar if you have any details. And also, please, any questions, please feel free to email us at bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org, and we can answer any of your questions related to the Tier 2 mitigations. And also, hopefully, move on to the next slide, hopefully we can move quickly into Tier 1 mitigation. So right now, we're, as of yesterday, in Tier 2. We're hoping to from the state be able to move down to Tier 1, which means a loosening of restrictions. In order to do that, we need to get our positivity rate below 8% for 3 consecutive days. As of today, it's at 8.0%. So we're really hopeful that we're moving in the right direction and that maybe even by this weekend, we will be able to move to Tier 1 mitigation measures. And we're under Tier 1, that's when indoor dining can resume at very limited capacity. And then once we get below 6.5%, that's when we can then move to more widespread reopening back into what we were back in the earlier in the fall. So I wanted to, while we're here, I know you guys are all here for TPP. We have plenty of time. We're going to jump into that. I wanted to make sure to provide an overview of that. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Carol Harris. She's from the Small Business Administration, the SBA. She's going to go into detail, providing an overview of the Paycheck Protection Program. It might take us a minute to switch PowerPoint slides. But Carol will take it from here, providing an overview of the Paycheck Protection Program. And again, I see a lot of questions come through, so look forward to getting those questions answered. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Brad, thank you. And Elisa, thank you for the opportunity. Mark Ferguson, who is our Deputy Director, if you happen to be on, would you please let Elisa know so that she can help you get to the platform as a presenter?
I'm here.
All right. Thank you. So we're going to get started. And Elisa, are you going to present, or am I presenting? Am I sharing?
You are able to advance the slides.
Okay. Right now, I don't see the slides, so I'll pull mine up. Can everyone see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So it's okay if I do this?
You should be able to go to slideshow and do it a full screen. There it is. Perfect.
Okay. So we will get rolling. So I wanted to say good afternoon to everyone. My name is Carol Harris, and I work with the Illinois District Office of the Small Business Administration. We're a federal agency, and I'm grateful to have my direct manager, Mark Ferguson, on the line too. And Mr. Ferguson is the Deputy District Director for the Illinois District Office for the U.S. Small Business Administration. And our agency is focused on providing economic development assistance to Illinois citizens and small business owners. So we're delighted to have the opportunity to step to the platform to say hello to the citizens and small business owners in Chicago and to share with you current information related to the Paycheck Protection Program. And also some additional information related to resources that are available to help small business owners. So just briefly, this is what we're looking to do. We're going to provide you with some information as far as key dates. We're going to provide you with some definitions related to what's known as first and second draw of PPP loans. Sometimes you will hear me refer to them as P3. We're going to also then provide information related to forgiveness updates and sort of what to do now, additional resources and information. Please recognize that this is a high-level overview. a very high-level overview, and we're basically providing information to you related to our programs. Now, what you should be aware of related to the start of the Paycheck Protection Program is that Congress intended for this round to basically help increase access, and that is super, super, super important. And with that increased access, we want to make certain that we are addressing some of the hardest hit small businesses, and that includes in underserved segments, obviously in urban corridors, but that it also includes various demographics such as women, minorities, and veterans. And so what we're doing is initially, and I'm going to share with you the dates, we opened this process for submission of applications to community financial institutions that serve underserved communities. And then we're working with small business owners to help them with utilizing the lender match platform so that you as a small business owner, as a borrower, can find participating P3 lenders. And then we're going to provide trainings across the country, but very specifically in the state of Illinois, and materials and assistance. We're working with our resource partners, and that includes the small business development centers. Quite a few of them are also neighborhood business development centers. So you're going to continue to hear about this process of making application to the P3 program, and SBA is going to continue to present this information across a couple of different platforms so that we can make certain that citizens and small business owners in the state of Illinois, and specifically in the city of Chicago, are aware of the programs and can look to make application. So I want to walk through a couple things related to key program dates and also provide some definitions. As mentioned, the Paycheck Protection Program, or as I refer to it as P3, has reopened for 2021. Now, this new appropriation was signed into law in December of 2020, and it's for approximately $284 billion. The program was extended to March 31st of 2021. And so you're aware, one of the definitions I'd like you to pay attention to is first draw means that you may be a borrower that's looking to obtain your first paycheck protection loan. Second draw means that you might happen to be a borrower that actually received a first Paycheck Protection Program loan, and now you're looking for a second paycheck protection loan, okay? That's what second draw means. So, related to these key dates, last week, we basically opened up the program to applications from community financial institutions. And what is a community financial institution? It can include CDFIs, which are certified, community development financial institutions. It could include minority depository institutions, certified development companies, and microloan intermediaries. And we're also delighted to be presenting today with one of the microloan intermediaries, which is Accion Chicago. On January 13th, the program opened up to second draw PPP loan applicants from CFIs. Again, the focus being on making certain that the hardest hit small businesses and the lenders that work with small businesses within these various communities has the opportunity to make application and to get funding. Okay, the whole focus is on small businesses. January 15th, basically first and second draw applications to lending institutions with $1 billion or less in assets. That window opened today, is January 19th. And the City of Chicago BACP was intentional in working with SBA and saying we really, really want to put together a webinar, and we'd like for SBA and a lender to step up to the platform and talk about this Paycheck Protection Program. Today's January 19th, and the P3 program is open to first and second draw applications throughout the nation. So for all those that are taking the time to tune in, you're right on point in that today is opening day for Paycheck Protection Program applications throughout the nation. The other key time date is March 31st, where all applications should be submitted. Now, where are they submitted? They're submitted to a lender, and it's really important to say that. Why is that important? Because we have several different loan programs, but in this case, they're submitted to a lender, and in submitting to a lender, you're able to work with that lender to obtain approval. Now, let's just kind of talk about what's a first draw loan, and you can see this slide. It basically includes a number of additional entities. Please note that there's additional eligible expenses. That's super, super, super important. Please know that you can use the loan proceeds anytime between 8 and 24 weeks after disbursement. That you as a small business owner may be able to increase your original paycheck protection loan amount, and that you should look to apply on or before March 31st or until congressional appropriations expire. Now, paycheck protection loan applicants should basically look to apply through a participating lender. The lender will look to review the application. The lender will look to submit the application to the SBA. And then at that point, there's some compliance checks that take place. So there's going to be a short time lapse. But what's really important to recognize is that you can take a look at, or you can Google the form, SBA Form 2483. You would look to connect with your lender. The lender may use their own forms in the process of receiving your application. But what you want to do is you want to try to make certain that you as a small business owner provide supporting documents. And related to their supporting documents, there's usually quite a few. So when you sit down and make application, whether you make it online, whether you're filling out a form, talk with your lender. And when you take a look at pulling together your application, you want to pull together your business financial statements. You want to make certain that you're on point related to your bookkeeping. You want to make certain that you're talking directly with your lender so that you understand the process of making application, whether it be at their portal or whether they're asking you to in some way email and or scan documents. Related to eligibility. Okay, small businesses basically would look to comply with size standards, and the eligibility criteria includes several points. What's very important to recognize is that there is some new eligibility. Now housing cooperatives can look to make application for a P3 loan. Destination marketing organizations, some chambers of commerce that may have a 501c6 designation, and some news organizations may now be eligible to apply for a P3 loan. Still eligible and continuing to be our 501c3 nonprofit organizations, 501c19, which are veteran organizations, tribal businesses. Now here's the key. Sole proprietors that are out there, these independent contractors and self-employed individuals, you are eligible to apply for P3 loans. And then obviously business entities such as partnerships, corporations, and LLCs. Okay? And then the other thing that is super important to understand is related to the eligible expenses that I mentioned before on the prior screen. Some of the additional expenses that can now be included will are operational expenditures. Unfortunately, if you are a small business owner and you experienced property damage, some of those costs may also be included. Supplier costs and obviously worker protection expenditures are now included. Now, what's a second draw P3 loan? Okay. Keep in mind, second draw means a second PPP loan. And this is for borrowers that previously received a Paycheck Protection loan, have 300 employees or less, and perhaps have suffered a 25% reduction in gross receipts. For most borrowers, the maximum loan amount of the Paycheck Protection Program, the second draw, is 2.5 times the average monthly 2019 or 2020 payroll costs, with the ceiling for the loan being up to $2 million. However, there is a special accommodation and food sector NAICS code, which stands for North American Industrial Classification Standard, and that code is 72. Keep in mind your NAICS code tends to be a 6-digit number. And if it begins with 72, which is in the accommodation and food services sector, the maximum loan amount for second draw can be up to 3.5 times the average monthly 2019 or 2020 payroll costs, up to $2 million. So we know that that's going to impact perhaps quite a few restaurants, caterers, and the rest. Again, businesses that may be in the and also perhaps hotels. And again, that's businesses that are in the accommodation and food services sector. That's the NAICS code 72. The other thing that's super important is this. Second draw Paycheck Protection loan applicants would look to submit the information on an SBA form 2483SD, which is the borrower application, when they're making application to their lender. Now, with second draw, what's super important to recognize is that they should have previously received a first draw PPP loan. And the thought is that you as a small business owner have either used or will use the first draw PPP loan amount for eligible expenses before the second P3 draw loan is dispersed. You should have no more than 300 employees, and you should look to see that your financial documents will demonstrate that unfortunately you may have experienced a 25% reduction in your gross receipts in your sales in comparable quarters between 2019 and 2020. So unfortunately, I'm certain we know as small business owners, if you've been impacted because of some of the public health concerns or the ordinances that have been put in place and your revenues dropped, you would have the opportunity to demonstrate the fact that your gross receipts or your revenues have dropped. And best case scenario, under that 25%, you would be eligible to make application. And again, it's a comparison between quarters for 2019 and 2020. I'm going to kind of move forward because I see I'm moving out of time, but I just want to share a few other things with you. For the Paycheck Protection forgiveness, these are a couple of updates related to the E2 Act. What is the E2 Act? That's the Economic Aid Act. I developed a few acronyms for a few things, and the bottom line is that borrowers must apply for forgiveness through their lender, and the lender submits the borrower forgiveness decisions to the SBA. And what's super important to recognize is this: Paycheck Protection Program, first or second draw. Make certain that you are keeping your receipts, that you are documenting what you're dispersing for, and assuming that you do that, you're able to apply for forgiveness, because this is a 1% loan, a 2 or a 5-year maturity date, and it's 100% guaranteed. So the fact that you can apply for forgiveness basically means that you receive those loan funds and you put forth the effort, but those loan funds can be forgiven. So it's a really, really good, we think it's a good economic incentive, and I want to encourage all small business owners to make certain that you pull together your documents and you look to make application. Some of the updates: EIDL, which stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advances, are no longer deducted from forgiveness payment. Forgiven P3 loans are not taxable income. That's super important because there was a hue and cry from the small business community. The IRS did take a look at it, and they actually made a change. And therefore, expenses, your small business expenses that are paid with a P3 loan, those funds are now tax deductible. You do want to consult with the IRS and or a tax advisor for details. And please know that the IRS and SBA are producing biweekly webinars by which we're talking about this process of P3 loans and the tax impact. Okay, so you might want to tune in. They tend to be every other Wednesday at 1 p.m. Expandable forgiveness expenses are permissible with any P3 loan that has not already been forgiven. And we do anticipate, skip pages, here we are. We do anticipate that a simplified forgiveness application for P3 loans for $150,000 and under is coming very, very, very soon. So there's 3 forgiveness forms, and that's the 3508S, there's the 3508EZ, and there's the 3508. Okay, you can Google them. You can also take a look at our website, and you do want to make certain as a small business owner that you take the time, gather together your documents, talk with your lender if possible, and you want to look to make submission for forgiveness for your Paycheck Protection Program loans. Okay, let's move this forward. Okay, now what to do now and some additional resources that's super important. You want to connect with your lender, whether it be brick and mortar, small business, credit unions, fintech, financial technology companies, CDFIs. Connect with your lender. If you do not have a lender, you can find one at our web page under Lender Match. And so that's sba.gov/lender match. And then if you are looking for information related to our programs, one of the most fastest ways to get to it is, again, our sba.gov/PPP for the most up-to-date documents. You can also look to connect with local assistance. And as mentioned, there's approximately 42 small business development centers in the state of Illinois, but specifically within the city of Chicago, there's a good 10 to 12. And quite a few of them also work with the city of Chicago, BACP, and or they host a small business development center, and perhaps they are also a neighborhood business development center. And they are sort of your local economic gurus. So you want to connect with that local assistance. You see the website, which is listed. You can also subscribe to our e-newsletter, and or you can follow us on Twitter. Our phone number for our office is listed, and our email address is illinois.do@sba.gov. Now, before I leave, I want to just share a few other things that I think are super important. We do have what's known as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Please know that that portal is open and that you can look to make application related to this program. It is a working capital loan program, and the terms are up to 30 years, and it's interest rate of 3.75 for businesses and 2.75 for nonprofits. Businesses and nonprofits are eligible. The key with this program and understanding it is this is where you're making application directly to the SBA. Okay, the Paycheck Protection Program, first or second round, you're making application directly to a lender. Okay, so contrasting sort of the differences, Paycheck Protection, 1%, 100% guaranteed, a period of 2 to 5 years, and you have the opportunity to apply for forgiveness. But with the EIDL loan, while it is a longer term, it is a slightly higher interest rate at 3.75 or 2.75. You're making application directly to SBA. Okay, just keep those two in mind. There is a streamlined online application at our website. Okay. The other thing that I want to share with citizens and small businesses across the city of Chicago is that SBA does have a debt relief program in place that extends the government payment of principal, interest, and fees on SBA guaranteed loans, 504, and the microloan programs that is in place. And right now, there's an additional extension of 3 months of payments on all current loans, okay? And there's a few other additional incentives based upon your NACE code, but the bottom line is for new 7A 504 and the microloans, it's 6 months, but for current loans, it's 3 months. And then finally, we have been stepping up to the platform to provide assistance related to what are known as SVOs, or SAS to save our SOS to save our stage. SVO stands for Shuttered Venue Operators, which is the term that SBA utilizes. We have presented quite a few webinars. These are going to be, and what's important to recognize with this program is that these are grants. They can go up to $10 million to entities in several industries, and they tend to be theatrical producers, live venue type spaces, museum operators, and the rest. There are some specific eligibility criteria related to SVOs. These are grants. As a small business owner, if you operate a venue, you would actually look to register in SAM, which is known as our system for, I think it's system for award management. And the strong suggestion is that you would look to work with a local assistance provider, and or that you would tune in to one of the upcoming webinars by which we'll share additional information related to the process of registering in SAMs and looking to make application for this grant. So with that said, what I think is super important for small business owners is this: gather together your financial documents. Take the time to work with local assistance, perhaps in the form of an SBDC and or a SCORE assistant. You want to make certain that you are prepared to talk with your lender and or that you understand how the lender is actually receiving the application. And you want to try as best as possible to work with any of your financial advisors, whether it be your tax advisors. You will make the best decisions in the process of being with trusted advisors. And I want to encourage you to make application for a number of these different loan programs and or this grant program so that we can work through the process of this pandemic, and best case scenario, you will come out well on the other side. With that said, I want to thank the City of Chicago for giving Mark and I the opportunity to present. I'm just laughing because you'll probably hear some of this commentary, especially as we begin to answer questions, in making certain that we give you concise and correct information as far as our understanding relates to the Paycheck Protection Program. So with that said, I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to pass the baton back to Brad. I'm going to pass the baton back to Isaac, and I'm going to say, Brad, it's good to hear what information you can share related to Accion Chicago and the Paycheck Protection Program.
Thank you so much, Carol. We will now transition to Brad with Accion.
And I do apologize. There's just one other thing I want to share with the team. We're going to take questions after Brad makes his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. You are set up.
Carol, thank you very much. That was all very helpful. Appreciate that very much, and all the good work that SBA has done. Thank you, Isaac, also to you and to the whole BACP team at the city. At the moment, I think we still see the BACP presentation, so I'm going to do it my way and share my screen, if that's okay, and make sure that everyone can see this. I believe you're going to see a big bunch of orange at the moment.
Yes, it's visible. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to just briefly highlight who we are and then move right into the meat here, because I want to go through this material very quickly so we can get to as many of your questions as possible before we have a hard stop at 4:30. So Accion is a nonprofit community development financial institution based on the west side of Chicago in East Garfield Park at the corner of Lake and Kedzie. Our mission is to help neighborhood entrepreneurs grow, and we do that by providing the capital and the coaching and the connections that small business owners need to create wealth and jobs throughout Illinois and Indiana. We're going to be called Accion for another 8 days. So on the evening of the 27th, we'll be changing our brand, new strategies, new loan platform, and everything, so stay tuned for that. So I'm going to do 3 things. 1, discuss if you are applying for PPP and you did not receive one in 2020, and then we'll turn to those who did. And then we're going to get to the hard part, and that is, what is the information that's required of you in order to successfully apply? And we'll go through what's the same and what's different relative to the previous PPP rounds earlier. I will apologize up front for all of the working from home noises, dogs, and all the rest that you surely will encounter, because that's just our lives at the moment. So apologize for that. All right. So let's talk first if you're eligible, if you did not receive a PPP in 2020. So basic criteria has not changed here. It's 500 fewer employees. Were you in business February 15th or before, and are you still operational? To be clear here, if your business has been closed because of all the mitigation measures, that's okay. You're still eligible. It's only if you have disbanded the organization in full that you're no longer eligible because it's not an active business. I think as Carol had suggested, the eligible types of businesses has expanded. So you can be a for-profit business, a nonprofit, either a C3 or a C6, housing cooperative, and so forth. And then there are separate provisions, but you are eligible if you're self-employed, sole proprietor, and contractor. So if the answer to all of these is yes, then you are indeed eligible. You can borrow, same as before, 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, or up to $10 million if you are a first borrower, and the terms are very attractive. So let me just pause and reiterate the fact that, as Carol had suggested, when there are grants available, obviously, go for those. Accion did a ton of grant work in partnership with the state and the city and a number of different counties. Free money is better, so obviously go for that. If you're going to have to take out debt, though, this is the place to do it, because the rates are very attractive, no fees, and some or all of this loan, unlike most loans, can be guaranteed, which I think all of you know. That's why PPP has been, in some respects, very popular, although in other respects, very difficult. We'll come to those provisions in just a second, but the terms are very good. So how much can be forgiven? That's going to be dependent upon, over the following 8 to 24 week period after you secure your PPP loan, what happens in your business and what are you able to substantiate with your documentation. So have you maintained your employee and compensation cost levels? That's for full-time and part-time employees. You spend all the proceeds on either payroll or eligible costs, talk about that in a second. And at least 60% of the costs need to be on payroll. Now then the other 40% or more, sorry, the other 40% or less can be on things like mortgage or rent, utilities, worker protection, that's new, uninsured property damage costs, again, that's new. And then in addition, you can have some of your costs be covered for supplier costs and other expenses for operations. That's new too in this round. So more broad eligible expenses for forgiveness, in order to make it more likely that if you get a loan, you'll get all that money back, or at least you won't have to repay that money rather. So let's move then to what happens for you if you're thinking about whether you're eligible if you did receive a PPP last year. Much of this is similar, but I'm just going to highlight the differences to make sure it's clear on where those differences are. First of all, the round 2, the second draws in the language that SBA and Treasury are using, that's for only organizations with 300 or fewer employees rather than 500. I think most people on this call are still going to be eligible, I suspect. All of the rest of those criteria are similar. I will add, though, that you have to have either already or soon will fully use the dollars that you received in your first loan in order to be eligible for your second. The borrowing size is different. So the maximum is not 10 million anymore, it's 2 million for the second draw. It's 2.5 times average monthly payroll unless you're in, as Carol was talking about, NAICS Code 72. So I'm going to give you the full list of those industries in just a second, so you know in what cases you can get 3.5 times your average monthly payroll instead of just 2.5 times. Terms, again, quite similar to what you mentioned before. So what are those business areas, those industry segments that are part of this larger amount that you can borrow? It's this list. So it's generally food and accommodation, generally. So it's hotels, bed and breakfast, travel accommodation generally, plus RVs, and then food service contractors, caterers, mobile food, bars, pubs, restaurants, cafeterias, and so forth. So those are the industries, under the theory, of course, that those have been hardest hit, even amongst a lot of industries that have been absolutely crushed by the pandemic, that Congress decided to provide even more benefit to relative to what the original legislation in 2020 provided. So that's the set of industries in which you can get 3.5 times average payroll instead of 2.5 times. So the means by which you can get your second PPP, the second draw forgiven, again, it's very similar in this case relative to if you were just getting your application in for the first time. Have to use the eligible costs, the eligible expenses are the same, so forth. The most important thing really, and the only distinction, is that you have to use the second PPP for new expenses in a new 8 to 24-week period after you receive the loan, rather than paying for expenses that you were trying to cover and forgive under your first PPP loan. But otherwise, the language is the same. All right. So now let's get to the hard part. First of all, there's some basic information you're very likely going to need to provide in order to be successful applicants for PPP. And so to start with, this information is likely to be typed in to an application form. Your legal name, what type of structure you're under, whether it's a partnership, corporation, LLC, and so forth. Your employee identification number, your federal tax number, address, what date you're formed, and some basic information about yourself. So let's be clear on the fact that who you apply with will govern what data and documents you need to provide, because even though the program is uniform across the country, how that program will be interpreted from the point of view of the lender is up to the lender. They then in turn need to provide the data that the SBA has asked for. And so you would expect this generally going to be the same, lender to lender. It's not going to be identical in the way that the technology is provided to the applicants and the way that the documents are going to be collected. So what I'm going to try to provide here is information and now documents in a second that are possible that people will ask for, just so we can talk about the whole universe here, and then we'll whittle it down to what specific cases would suggest that you'll have certain types of documents. So I'm pretty sure that everybody's going to have to answer these questions you have here. This is the information you'll need to provide, which is just sort of keyed into the application. Now to the hard part. So there's going to be 3 pages here of the documents that you will likely need to provide in some fashion. So not all of these documents will be required. It's going to be in part depending on the size of your business, the type of your business. But I'm going to go through the full list so we can answer questions on these once we get to the Q&A in whatever way you'd like. So most of the time, I think your lender will likely be asking you about your auto schools corporation, including your bylaws. You'll need to upload your business license, I suspect. You'll almost certainly, with your lender, have to upload your at least 2019, and if you have them, 2020. I suspect most people will file 2019, given the fact that it's middle of January, and most people haven't filed in 2020 quite yet. But you'll be asked for your state and federal business and individual tax returns, all pages with signatures for 2019. On top of that, now you'll have to substantiate payroll. The reason is all of this stuff is listed as required in some form or another, is because in the absence of having the documentation for payroll, there's no way to calculate the amount for which you're eligible. And there's certainly not a way to substantiate the amount for which you're eligible either to borrow or later in order to get your forgiveness. And so what I've listed here is the list of the ways in which you can provide that payroll substantiation that your lender is likely to be asking for. So list of employees, a recent payroll report that shows those employees, and again, that's how you get at what the average employee cost was for part of the math that's required. then either a 941 form or a 940 form, largely dependent upon your structure. And then something to do with the payroll that you had over a 12-month period. And that could be a payroll journal. It could be a payroll report. There are a number of different ways to do that. It just depends on what you've got as to what you would upload. I will say that in our experience in the first couple rounds, this one was a killer for a lot of businesses. So we're going to be eager to help businesses think creatively and have this documentation available. We'll come back to that help in just a minute once we get through the rest of the documents. On top of that, the other eligible payroll costs, because you remember that you have to have a minimum of 60% for forgiveness be dedicated towards payroll, but you can also get other costs covered. So group health insurance, retirement benefits, taxes, some of these other items are ways in which you can get more borrowed and more forgiven. And finally, financial statements. So this is the place in which you'll be able to and have to substantiate the fact that you have at least a 25% reduction in what you were able to earn in 2020 related to 2019 in order to qualify for a second draw. And that'll be in the form of financial statements, bank statements. So that is an awfully long required document list, which is why we go through all of that page by page, because it's really important to prepare with all the documents that you can get in order to, when you get on to the beginning of an application, you've got what you need in order to then be able to upload the documents that the application is going to require. Again, you'll follow whatever your lender that you've chosen to work with is requiring, but that is a pretty holistic list of the things you might be asked for. And so it's a useful thing to do to just prepare for that. So let's take a look at what comes next. So the deadline as it stands at the moment is that your loan has to be funded by March 31st. So that's 2.5 months away. Obviously, there's a significant period of time between now and then, but nonetheless, wouldn't suggest to wait. And so I think getting your documents in order now is a good idea. My suggestion is that if you did receive a PPP in 2020 and you're looking for a second draw, in most cases, it'd be wise to go and reapply with the same lender because of the fact that they already have so much of your documentation on file already, and it'll be faster for you that way. In some cases, though, the bank that you borrowed from in 2020 isn't doing the program again, and therefore you're not going to have that option. So hopefully that's not very frequent, but it may happen, in which case you're in the same situation as those who are applying in order to secure their first PPP loan. So if you didn't receive a PPP loan or you can't apply, again, use the SBA match site in the way that, that Carol had described it before. I'll just say that all of the work that we're doing as a sort of a community partner trying to help small business owners get access to these funds, we're partnering with another community development financial institution called CRF, and we have a very specific link, which is entirely too long, but it's on the screen right there, and we'll type that into the chat, so you don't have to key all this by yourself. But to that link, there's an application that we are helping people with in order to make sure that all the questions that people have about which documents they need, how do I calculate this, how do I calculate that, all of that is done with our other nonprofit partner, the two of us working together, and we're advising much capital through this program as we can. So to be clear, you do not have to use that link in order to apply for PPP. And I would say if you've already gotten it somewhere else, don't. Go back to where you had applied in the first place. But if you need a place to go and you can't find it otherwise, I'd certainly recommend using this particular application because we'll do our best to help you in partnership with our partner. So I want to pause right there and then make sure that we have as much time as possible for any questions people have, because I'll say that even though we can do a lot in creating broad contextual information for you, you all who've tried to apply for this in the past know that there's a lot of complexity and specificity that goes into how decisions get made about who's eligible for what and at what amount, both for the loans and for the forgiveness. So let's turn to those questions now, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that then I can get back to BACP.
Brad, thank you so much. Carol as well. This is Elisa Slazinska from Chicago BACP. Like Brad mentioned, we are now going to open it up for questions. I do want to mention we have a very good amount of attendees on this webinar, so we will do our best to go through them. If your question is not answered, we will post a couple emails in the chat box, so you'll be able to send us your questions that way. First question is, what if you were not able to be open in 2020 because you were closed due to COVID-19? Are you able to apply?
Were you closed for the entire year? I mean, we need a little more of a point of reference, only because it states that if you were open as of February 15th, you were putting something up, Brad? I'm sorry.
Oh, no. It's Elise. I'm just returning back to a simple screen for us to look at.
Oh, okay. It states that, if you're in business as of February 15, 2020, you can still apply, but you're saying you're out of business? I don't quite understand the length of business that the person was, out of business or closed.
So this person did not specify. I'm just assuming they owned a business and were not able to operate in 2020 because they had to close, most likely due to different COVID-19 restrictions.
That's one then, Elise, I think maybe they ought to direct to us, Carol and I, with a little bit more detail. Because I don't want to be misleading and give an answer that's kind of tricky, because then it gets into the first draw, second draw kind of thing. Need a few more facts, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest the following, that if the business went out of business, then what would be the point of applying? And so my suggestion is, if the person was impacted by, perhaps some ordinances or some health codes by which they were closed for a period of time, but they reopened, okay, then they could be eligible. And probably one of the best things that they would look to do would be to talk with a resource partner and present their information related to their financial documents as far as whether or not they were in business, if they remained in business, if they had to close for a period of time. Okay.
Great, thank you. A person asked, can I apply for a EIDL loan again, even though I got one last year?
Do you guys want to take that one, or you want me to take it?
Mark, you got it.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay. I just technically on this next tranche of money that's coming out that was signed on December 27th of 2020, the COVID, the Economic Aid Act relief for hard-hit businesses. This time around, it's going to be targeted for some of the LMI communities. And from what I understand, if you did not receive an EIDL loan from the original application back last year when we first came out with the advance, okay, and I take it when they say EIDL loans, they're talking basically about the advance, because that was the free portion or the grant portion. If they're indeed talking about that, if you received some of the money, say everybody was supposed to get $10,000, but we ran out of money so quickly, so we related it to, the PPP and limited to like $1,000 per FTE up to 10 people at one company. If you only got partial of it, if you got, say, $5,000 instead of the whole $10,000, you can go ahead and apply again for that, okay? You can also get it if your application was in place and we just ran out of money. We no longer had any $10 million. We came to a screeching halt. The advance was stopped. Then you qualify if you're in one of these low, moderate income districts that is now targeted on the second tranche. They will go ahead and take that. So in essence, if you never applied for the EIDL, right now, the way I understand it, okay, you'll have to wait until the ones who have already in line, who have applied like last summer, where they ran out of money or they didn't get enough monies, get an opportunity to get theirs, provided that they meet all the conditions of being in the LMI community, hard-hit, veteran, women-owned business, that sort of thing. That's the way I understand it. Brad, Carol, do you folks understand it that way also? At all, perhaps?
Yeah, I think there's no prohibition against applying. The speed at which you would get approved is going to be dependent on the size of the queue and that you're in. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And that if they had previously applied for an advance, that they can receive the difference up to $10,000. And as we know, we received 5.5 million applications, and so when Brad mentioned the speed, that is of concern. And that is why for so many of the small businesses, the recommendation is definitely you want to try to make it through the paycheck protection application. The advance makes sense. The only issue is that now there are quite a few more specific criteria, such as that low-income community definition and the fact that our agency is taking a little bit longer to process applications. If a small business owner is really, really trying to get access to funding, the best way to go right now is paycheck protection.
Great, thank you for that. Next question is, can P3 be used toward employees I intend to hire in 2021 or only employees I had in 2020?
In the covered period, in that 8 to 24 week period after your loan, the calculation for forgiveness is all based on the amount of compensation that you're paying. So two questions implied there. I think one is, how much am I eligible for? And then secondly, how much am I eligible to get forgiven? How much am I eligible for? That's based on what you've already paid. So you're not going to get any benefit for thinking ahead about hiring new people because that doesn't figure into the calculation for how much you can borrow. But for how much you might get forgiven later, if you have additional compensation expenses because you brought people on, that will help you get to the point where you could get some or even all of the loan forgiven.
Okay. A person asked, I'm still confused about payroll documentation, particularly if you are a sole proprietor. I file 1040 annually. Please advise.
So we always suggest, this is just a couple of comments. And first of all, if you are a sole proprietor, that you again separate out your business operations from your personal accounts. That's number one. You don't want to commingle them. So you want to look to make certain that you have a business account as a sole proprietor or independent contractor. The other thing that takes place is that from there, then perhaps you are going to look to try to make some draws by which initially on the Form C, on Schedule C, I should say, that is where you would look to pick up your net income, your net profits, and that is the number.
Line 31, Carol.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, line 31, where you would look to say, okay, this is the amount that I'm going to take a look at, that I'm going to divide by 12 and multiply by either 2.5 or 3.5 for your loan, for your possible loan amount. Okay, but unless you use a payroll company, okay, what's super important related to your disbursements, if I understand the question right, is to make certain that you separate out and have a separate business account from your personal account. And with that, you'll be able to better distinguish portions that are paid out related to your payroll and or draws. Anyone else have a suggestion?
I'll only add that this is the single hardest thing for us to work with small business owners to address last time. because at least in our experience for the community businesses that we typically work with and those we're trying to help in the previous round of CPP, it's unfortunately true that relatively few sole proprietors have payroll documentation handy to be able to use for a program like this. And without that kind of payroll documentation where there's some proof in order to help calculate an amount for which you're eligible to borrow, which is based on a payroll program, it isn't even in the title, it's very hard to get a lender to agree to provide the loan because they can't prove because you're struggling to prove the amount for which you think you're eligible. The other thing to mention is that you have to be profitable as a sole proprietor, and you don't have to be profitable if you're not. And so it's hard. But certainly if you've got ways to do what Carol suggested, have that split and go back in time and collect documentation accordingly, then that's the best bet you've got in order to try to get the application approved that you put in.
We have a couple questions for eligibility. First question, and they kind of go hand in hand, so I'm going to read both. Small, undocumented business owners in minority communities qualify for a P3 loan. And the similar question is, I wanted to know if people without social security numbers, but with ITIN numbers could apply.
I'll take a crack at this, but Mark and Carol, please correct me if your interpretation is different than mine.
Yes, sir.
Last year it was very clear that ITINs were not eligible for PPP. For this new language, I'm still not sure. And the reason is, it seems unclear. There's two different places in which in the legislative text that are in conflict with each other that we're trying to get resolution to. So, Mark, feel free to correct me on any.
Brad, you're absolutely correct. We were wrestling with this and trying to get a definitive answer last week at our management meeting, and we still up there at headquarters, and they're still sifting through it. It's contrary information, and then we had to break it down too. If it was what about the folks that were actually working for a company? I mean, it even bordered close to what if there were undocumented workers? Could you get it there? And so we're trying to work through that one right now. That's one that you're going to have to table, and you should probably just send it in to us in about a week or so. We're trying to get to that one. As Brad said, and I'm sure Carol attests to, because she was in the same meetings I was in last week, we don't have an answer for that right now. But we're working on it. So we're going to do our best to get an answer, but for right now, you got us.
In cases like this, I do not envy SBA Treasury trying to interpret legislation which on the face of the text conflicts with itself.
Yep.
All right, next question is, are you able to apply for this round of P3 without getting decision on forgiveness from your last round of P3?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yes.
That was a little simpler response.
No, it's, you have to do, you can.
The forgiveness process takes some time. So you may have already made application to your bank, and perhaps your bank has looked at the documentation and made application to the SBA. Yes, you can look to apply for a new P3 loan, having not received the final forgiveness answer from your lender for your first P3 loan.
Next question is, I didn't have a 2019 tax return and haven't filed 2020 yet. Is there another document that can be substituted in lieu of a tax return?
So I think it depends upon, I'll take this one just partially. I think it depends upon what your documents are. You might file a 941. And if you file 941, those are your quarterly returns. what you're going to lead up to. You want to make certain that you file as soon as possible. Okay, as far as your 2019 and best case scenario 2020, my understanding is that the filing season is actually, the date has been pushed back to February 12th with the IRS. That's something that's new that's coming out, but that the requirement is that filings take place by April 15th. So to that small business owner, I would say take a look at your 941s in case you have to file some quarterlies, but you should try to get your 19 in as soon as possible. Anyone else? Are my colleagues in agreement with that? Or Brad, do you have a suggestion?
No, I think that's absolutely right. The only thing I'll add is that each lender will have a slightly different interpretation about exactly what documents they will require in order to do their own determinations for eligibility. And so I think you might find that some lenders would find just having a 940 or 941 be sufficient, and others are going to ask for your full signed returns from either 19 or 20, state and federal. So in that regard, it kind of depends on who you're working with, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the case.
Okay. Next question is, I have several small businesses, all have been affected by the pandemic. Can I apply for P3 for each business, even though I'm the owner of all of them?
Yes.
Yep. Well, particularly if you have a separate EIN for each one and you filed taxes individually for each one, you'll get into a more difficult situation if you could combine multiple businesses into a single EIN and we're trying to file taxes collectively for all of them. If you're trying to sort of apply for multiple businesses under a single EIN, that won't work. But provided that you split out the businesses in tax terms, then yeah, this will be no problem.
Keep in mind also, though, you know, we do have an affiliation rule. So on the first, if it's first go round for, you know, 10 million, it'll be an aggregate up to 10 million with the different EINs, but it's still going to be an affiliation kind of issue where you might be the principal of each business. You know, you wouldn't be able to exceed 10 million if you had, like, say, 10 million. If you had 10 businesses, you wouldn't be able to exceed the 10 million cumulatively because affiliation rule with the common ownership. So Brad's right. That's also true, so you know, too, for you folks out there that want to know whether or not you can have more than one EIDL loan. If you have more than one EIN number, yes. Okay? But in that instance, they go by the actual EIN number where each entity stands on its own.
Okay. Two questions relating to the EIDL. First one is the advance of $1,000 similar to last time, and are 501c3s able to apply?
Yeah. The $1,000 rule is out the window right now. That does not apply as we know it and as legislation as it's come down the pike today. Now, what was the other part? Was that Elisa was about? I'm sorry. What was that other part?
Yeah, no problem. It was whether 501c3s are able to apply.
I was under the impression that they were, but I may stand corrected, and I'd probably have to look it up. CJ, do you have anything on that one?
So my understanding is that if you're eligible for the EIDL loan, which is 501c3s, then you're also eligible for the EIDL advance. But keep in mind that, again, there's additional criteria on the advance that it can look to go up to $10,000, that it is related to a in this case, it would be a 501c3 that's located in a low-income community, and there's some additional things that come up related to the number of employees, the low-income community definition. I did put the web page, geomap, geocode information in the chat box for that. So what I would say would be is that there's some additional things that take place related to that advance, okay? And that as a 501c3, can you apply for an EIDL loan? Yes, you can.
Good.
You know, the other thing, Elisa, is that, you know, we have out for public comment right now talking about not-for-profits like faith-based too, whether or not that'll be up for consideration where we'll be able to make our regular SBA loans to those folks too. And that just came out in a news release today, I believe it is. So I'm leaning more and more and more toward the 501c3 and more faith-based type institutions where they would be eligible. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Great. A couple questions about proof of payroll. A person's asking, is a direct bank transfer considered proof for a payroll payout? And another person is asking specifically by using Zelle, is that good enough proof for payroll?
Well, okay. We're really small business. Okay.
I've heard that question before.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this right now. I think that the small business owners need to get real, and that part of getting real is that you really need to establish that separate lender account, because I've heard a banker saying Zelle was not enough, that it was not necessarily proof of payment, whether that was the receipt of funds. And so I think that one of the things that's going to take place with small business owners is based upon who you're working with. Great. You put yourself in a better position as a small business owner if you take the time to set up a business checking account. Simple. It's real simple. And it's the whole issue, unfortunately, and I need you all to hear me so that you're not discouraged but be encouraged, but it has to do with the comminglement of funds. And it's this process of saying you may be a sole proprietor, okay, that's understandable, but that some aspects of your transactions are related to your business, which may be separate from your personal, okay? And you may own that business personally, but there are some aspects of your business, okay, that are going to go into a separate account, which therefore gives you a better sense of cash transactions related to your business. Okay.
Well, I was going to add that too, related to what Brad and you said earlier, Carol. You know, a lot of it's going to depend on the relationship that you have with the lender that you're going through, because they'll be able to guide you. I mean, there's certain practices. One of the things that I like about your presentation, Brad, was you showed them realistically what do you need to, what kind of documentation should you have in hand to come to this party? You know, you just don't only get to be this tall, but you got to have this other stuff in your pocket too. So I thought that was excellent. And I think that that's going to be determined pretty much by the lender and the comfort level that they have with you.
Next question is, if you have not filed for forgiveness yet because your lender has said to simply wait until further guidance is given, does it hurt your application for second P3?
No. You know,
no, it does not.
And that's kind of, you know, it does not hurt at all, despite the fact that I know that if you go to www.sba.gov PPP and you look at the regs or the regulations and everything, it would say that in order to qualify for that second round of money of PPP, you need to have given the money back, paid it in full, or be fully forgiven. But, you know, again, you could apply for forgiveness, and because it takes time, you can still apply for the second tranche. And I think that's what everybody has to kind of be aware of. Just be, don't be thrown off. That was just, I'm not going to say poorly worded, but, they always say, what is the intent of the reg and what is the literal meaning of the reg? And I think that the intent was to say, if you already applied for forgiveness and that's being settled between the bank and SBA, and it's out of your hands, you can apply for a new PPP or the second round money for PPP.
Yeah, I think that's right. Even though it's unlikely you'll get your second draw funded before the determination is complete on forgiveness for the first round, you should absolutely apply and get into that queue, get all the documentation uploaded, get it substantiated, so that then essentially in back-to-back fashion, you'd be eligible both to get the forgiveness and also the second draw without having a big delay between the two.
Agreed. CJ, you got anything to add to that, Carol?
Right on point. It's about planning and preparation. Make it happen.
Okay.
All right. Question is, what if I opened in January 2020 and had to shut down in March 2020? How do I determine how much I qualify for?
I would suggest at this point you don't, for two reasons. One is, if you shut down, you may not be open. And if you're not functional, then there would not necessarily be the qualify. How you would look to determine. I can tell you that initially the amounts are based upon looking at the prior reoccurring cost, such as payroll, such as supplier expenses, and the rest. So if you opened in January and you closed in March, you may not have been able to establish the fact that you were profitable or that you had a number of payments, systematic payments to make by which you establish a working capital flow. And at that point, unfortunately, I don't think you might be eligible. Anyone else have a comment? And Brett, I saw you go zip.
Yeah, no. Sorry, that was an itch. My fault. Not at all. The vagaries being on camera. I think the only thing to add is that if you did, in fact, have 2 months of eligible expenses and revenues that'll help you to get an average sort of compensation cost for the basis of calculating how much you might be able to borrow, and even though you closed your business in March of 2020, if you didn't disband the business, you're just temporarily closed because of the mitigation measures, then you'd have all the data that you needed in order to calculate a loan amount, and therefore you could, in theory, apply. It just might be for a relatively small amount because there'd be so little potentially in costs that you incurred that you'd be able to cover and revenue that you'd be able to claim. But in theory, if you had a really good 2 months in January and February, then it's at least possible.
Okay.
I'd say send it into the box, www.illinois.do@sba.gov, and maybe we can get a little bit more detailed answer. Not to say that Carol and Brad are inconsistent, but I think that if I remember correctly, I think that with the original PPP, as long as you were in business as of February 15, 2019, or in this case, 2020, I know that they were using the payroll that was prior to the February 15th date. So I would say, why don't you send that to the box and we'll get an answer for you, a more definitive answer, because it might not even be worth your time, because I'm not sure if we'll annualize that out or if we'll look at the 1 month. I'm not real sure. I would say, not that Carol and Brad are not on point, I would say to get a definitive answer, send it into the Illinois District Office box, and we'll get an answer to you, a more definitive answer.
And we have time for a couple more questions. And similar to what Mark just said, we have a lot of people on this webinar. So if your question did not get answered, we are going to post a couple emails and websites in the chat box, so you'll be able to reference them and send your questions in that way. Question is, let's see, is the P3 loan or other opportunities available to mom and pop landlords who do not have employees but have had extended vacancy due to COVID?
What are they going to, and PPP is to subsidize a payroll. And it's a mom and pop operation, number one. Number two, it's passive income. Again, I will check that one out. Brad, Carol, do you guys have any idea about that, about passive income? I just know from being an underwriter previously, we weren't ever allowed to use passive income. Now, if they were a mom and pop operation, just happen to be property managers with other properties, perhaps, and they exactly had a payroll, not a vacancy, but a payroll that they paid a janitor, a manager for their property management company, what have you, that could work. But if you're talking about a day-to-day investor who just had a vacancy, can you qualify? I'm going to say no. I'll be more than happy. Mark Ferguson, I'll be more than happy to look it up, but my original inclination is no.
No, I think Mark's right. Unfortunately, I don't think a business like that, unless the circumstances are very specific, would be able to be eligible because of the fact the program is driven on payroll, and that's not the kind of cost that this kind of organization will have.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Brad said, Elisa, they got folks, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand this whole thing. You don't have a credit check. We don't care about your income. All you got to do is say, look, I had these people on my payroll, and that's going to determine your maximum loan amount. So I don't know how a vacancy, especially with passive income, is going to qualify you for PPP. But if you're hard pressed, like I said, Mark Ferguson, SBA.gov, hit me.
Okay. And we will end with this question, which seems very valuable. Can you or should you apply for a P3 from multiple lenders?
I'm going to let you guys handle that. I got my own reservations on that.
I mean, the way the SBA system is structured, there's a check in place to make sure that you can't get funded twice. And normally we would say that doesn't make any sense at all. Like in normal terms where your credit is being pulled, therefore you're getting a hit on your credit score every time that you do a loan application. So generally, applying a whole bunch of places at the same time for a loan, not smart at all. In this particular case, I think I would certainly recommend that you work with either the same lender you used before or one from SBA Lender Match, because there's a lot of work to get the application in. But if you're just not confident, you're not getting good customer service from the lender you chose to apply with first, the SBA is going to prohibit you from getting funded twice anyway. So I think in this unique, isolated circumstance, it's not nearly as a bad idea as it normally would be to apply in multiple places. And so I don't think there's nearly the harm that you normally would have in applying multiple. So that's a squishy way to say it's okay in this isolated circumstance, but it's not generally a very good practice.
Yeah, just a few other things. If you've been approved for the first one, you want to make certain that you have your documents, including that loan number for the second, because that's a question that does come up in the application. And Brad is correct. We do have some checks and balances in place related to making certain that the loan is not funded twice. And it also does create a difficult scenario for lenders that are processing so many loans if the loan is kind of sort of held twice, where lender A and lender B may not be able to actively get the loan funded if there's duplicate applications. But I think the bigger issue that comes up is whether or not you were pleased with and were able to work with the services that you received from the first lender. If you had a good experience, and I'm hopeful that you did as a small business owner, then you might want to look to work with them, okay? If you did not have a good experience, well, then you got to figure out, even if, is there a bank that more so meets the needs that you have as a small business owner? And if so, you just want to make certain that you go prepared. And again, maybe only make one application. But can you? Yeah, you can. You can do anything. It's America. The question is whether or not it works, okay? And I can tell you that there are some checks and balances in place. And so I would not suggest that you take a look at applying to multiple lenders.
Folks, what I was going to say is that I'm in total agreement with Brad and Carol. But you got to remember, we had a couple of those scenarios where a person that had three. You go to three different entities, they may allow some other expenses that didn't come in. And I had some instances during the first PPPs where folks they went to bank A and they were taking too long, so they got impatient. They went to bank B and C. Bank A went on and approved them, say, for like $10,000, but then B and C had approved them for like $20,000, and then they got stuck. Ultimately, what happens is that you're going to, not only do the banks get all tied up with their appropriations for monies that go against their loan loss reserve, after they internally approve it, they've got that in their head. But what you're doing, ladies and gentlemen, you're taking away from your fellow brothers and sisters in small business who would like to apply, but, you went and applied 2 or 3 times to other banks, and you're taking away an opportunity from them. Be patient. And for those of you who've already got the first tranche of money on PPP, the service may not have been the greatest, but if you really need the money, if you went to the ball or went to the prom with that person, you might want to take them back home with you. You know what I'm saying? So probably you're better off just sticking with that same lender because they already know you, although, you may not have gotten the greatest of service. It's not about that. It's about you being leaders and providing monies so your workers can go ahead, or your personnel can continue to work and feed their families, So, keep that in mind, because when you do that, to me, you're taking away opportunities from other people. That's the way I look at it. Is it legal? Yeah, you can do whatever you want, but is it cool? No, it's not cool. It's uncool.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Carol and Mark from the SBA and Brad from Accion. I want to end with just some quick resources. Like was mentioned, if your question did not get answered, you could send an email over to illinois.do@sba.gov. Full information about the P3 loan is on the SBA website at sba.gov/PPP. And Brad, do you want to share the website for Accion?
Yes, I'll re-enter just the site that is where we're helping people at PPP. It's not actually our website, but it's a place where there's resources available. Again, it's just one of many options, including all the other places on SBA Match that would be available to you.
Absolutely, thank you. And that will be over in the chat box for everyone to reference. I do want to quickly mention that this webinar was being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. So you'll be able to rewatch certain portions of this webinar and get some more information that way as well. Once again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for sharing this valuable information about this financial option for our entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Goodbye, everyone.
All right, thank you so much for joining. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Are we off the mic now? Can I ask a question? Time.